some of the rough times that inevitably will happen when we look at market cycles. Hi, Rupal. How are you?
Hey, Richard. Good afternoon. I'm very, very, very well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. You're looking good. You're looking good there, and all fresh and everything. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
We describe ourselves as property buddies, don't we?
We do indeed.
So hopefully we'll have a good buddy chat. But this is part of our Going Full Time in Property series for the podcast, which will also be a video, hence where you can see us. But what I wanted to do is really just, it's kind of profiling people that I call everyday people, and I don't mean you're not an everyday. You are an everyday person, but you're a very special everyday person because of what you've achieved. But I think it's a case of, as we maybe explain or go through your story and how your journey in property, perhaps before property is also relevant, just to share that with our audience and just give a bit of an insight so people can really say, well, maybe that's a path I could follow, or maybe I could learn some things from that. So that's the objective. But it's less about me, it's more about you. So I guess maybe if you could you just walk us through Rupal before property, and just however that is, you don't have to go from birth, just walk us through a little bit so we got context and a background about who you are and people can visualize that. Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah, that's great. I think sort of the general theme of my life seems to be that I have always been on sort of a non-plan plan. So by that I mean I've never really, until very recently in life, actually sat down and thought, okay, 5 years from now, this is where I want to be, 10 years, this is where I want to be. And so I've always just been the type of person who's made sort of the best decision with the options in front of me at that time, and then just been open to opportunities as they arose. And the reason I sort of set the tone in that way is because I think it sort of will help make sense of this slightly non-traditional perhaps path that brought me here and sort of that I'm still on. So immediately before property, my previous career was in foreign intelligence, and I did that for about 6 years. It was phenomenal. I did some amazing worked with fantastically brilliant people. There was a lot of sense of mission, camaraderie, doing something that's bigger than just the individual. And it was hugely fulfilling. But for personal reasons, aka my now husband, I decided to leave that career behind and leave the States and move to the UK. So when I did that, I'm a consummate nerd. I love school, I love learning, I never stop learning, and sort of my go-to move traditionally has been like, let me just go back to school or to study. So after leaving my sort of intelligence career, I went to business school, where I thought it made sense to help me gain some sort of hard credentials that would make me employable and in the private sector. And while I was in business school, I very, very quickly realized I didn't ever want to work for anybody again. I sort of knew that in my heart of hearts from sort of a relatively young age. I don't do well with orders or being told by people what I can and can't or should or shouldn't do. And so, yeah, it sort of was this sort of tug of war between, go work for a big consultancy or a big bank or something, get another, great name on your CV. And what I knew was going to be true for the long term, which is just start on a path that's my own. And so after sort of consulting with my partner and doing a bunch of sort of mini experiments about what next, we both decided property would be the best option, and for lots of different reasons. I think I spoke about this last time, where it's just being able to have an impact, being able to positively transform people's lives, having something tangible that you can point to and touch at the end of a hard day's work. All of these sort of big and small things. But to be completely honest, when we got started in property, I knew, for me, it's not true for him, but for me, it was actually going to be a means to an end. So for me, getting started in property was all about buying back my time, getting financial freedom, replacing my income, replacing my husband's income, so then I could decide what came next and not have the stress and the worry of like, oh, well, I can't afford to make a bold decision, or being beholden to a job or anything else like that. And so that was sort of, sort of when we got started in property, those were the goals, was to buy back our time, to buy back our financial freedom. And then both of us could then explore, what it was that we wanted to do from there.
That's wonderful. I mean, there's so many different things there I could dive into, but
Yeah.
I think with some people. So we talk. I mean, I've just finished reading Unscripted, for example, by M.J. DeMarco. I don't know if you've read that particular book of his. His first book was The Millionaire Fastlane, but he's very much a contrarian. And spoiler alert: the books basically are talking about the way out of the script, or the matrix, or off the mousetrap, off the hamster wheel. Is to be your own boss and be an entrepreneur. And it sounds like that has just been in you. Certainly since, I don't know what the transition point was, because obviously you were working in foreign intelligence, went into business school, and at some point, I guess there was something saying, hey, I don't know if I want to work for a boss anymore. So it's an interesting path, isn't it? Because there are some people who, in fact, a couple of people I've already interviewed on this series, they had a career, and they had a fairly lengthy career, probably 25 years plus, thereabouts, before they stepped out into going full-time in property. But you were relatively young and decided from an relatively early stage, that you were going to step out into that, not necessarily property initially, because you decided on property as being the initial route. But you were very much saying, I'm going to be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Which, for those who don't know what that is, that's just one of your alter identities, alter egos, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed.
So I think that's interesting. So was there a transition between working, say, you had a career in foreign intelligence, and then saying, actually, I don't want to necessarily go back and be an employee anymore, or even a consultant. I want to I want to be my own boss. What was the thought process there?
I think it was just the freedom, and really it was that. Actually it was two things. It was the freedom and the desire to just make my own rules for myself, to be able to live on my terms and all of that kind of stuff. But also it was, I guess, sort of the alpha part of me really wanted to see what I was made of, and to see if I could hack it, if I could set what at the time felt like a really audacious goal and actually do it and prove to myself that, actually, this is something that I can do. So there are two sides of it, but I think a lot of it really it came down to just not wanting to have anybody be able to tell me what to do.
Dropping my pen there.
That's okay.
And proving to yourself. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, we already got this really from the first time we spoke, and I was just amazed really of what an inspiration actually you are for the property community overall. So I think that's good. But I think stepping out and making the decision, it was a joint decision with your husband, obviously.
Yep.
So how did that conversation go?
It was actually pretty straightforward. He's like, I don't want to say he's like me, but we share some very fundamental values in common: integrity, independence, equality, sort of that kind of thing. And he's not one. I'm much more of a leap before you look type of person, and very, a bit not impulsive, but I'm more of an action. I do more than sometimes I think he might in the same situation, whereas he's a very considered and very thoughtful and very, let me make sure that I fully understand as much as possible without going into analysis paralysis, but I want to fully understand something before I decide which way to move. And it really was just a series of conversations. To be honest, he had started going down, sort of exploring additional streams of income anyway after we got together, because there was this assumption at the time that as and when we did get together and get married, we would eventually move back to the States. And so he too was thinking about, okay, well, in the absence of me having my career here in the UK, if we did move to the States, what would I be able to do to keep myself occupied and to earn a living, kind of thing. And so it was a lot of just sort of a bit of sort of forecasting about our lives and which directions they would go, how we would buy the independence that we wanted, because again, that being a bicontinental family whether we relocated to the States or we stayed here, you know, one of us was always going to be far away from our families. And again, didn't want to have the financial constraints or the time constraints about not being able to see them as often as we wanted and for as long as we wanted to. And so, yeah, it was just a couple of conversations. Yeah, probably just a couple actually of conversations. And we were on the same page. And, you know, what we had agreed upon was that he would keep his day job while I focused full time on building the property business, so that we had a bit of a safety net. We had, you know, we would be mortgageable. We would, you know, have all of those sort of the financial backstop that is required, but then one of us could really, really focus on the building and the growing and the foundations, because it would have taken a lot longer otherwise.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So it's an interesting that you brought that back into the conversation there about, did you both go full time in property from day one? Clearly, you
Yeah.
answered that question, which is your husband stayed working.
Yeah.
And you, just to dwell on that 1 second, then. So you know, a lot of people have a dream, let's say that, of being their own boss and stepping out. Maybe property is the vehicle. And okay, you're a husband and wife team. So by one of you, at least, you know, retaining a stable, you know, employment base, it gave some advantages, and you alluded to them already. But just to sort of bring them out there, why did you say that it allowed you to move quicker? Because some people might think the opposite, you know.
Yeah. So I think the quicker is that one of us was able to focus 100% on this.
Yeah.
Whereas, and again, it's not to say you can't do it if you've got other demands on your time. It's just that it could potentially take a lot longer because you've got another full-time job or other, you know, things competing for that time. So yeah, I mean, I think that was where this a lot of the speed came from. It doesn't mean that, you know, it took us half as long because I was working full-time in property and he was not. But it did just mean that we were able to make progress and really just focus on one of us could focus on building what we wanted to build. But also, and this so you alluded to Entrepreneur earlier. So Entrepreneur, for your listeners who don't know, is my community now that I founded for women founders in any industry, not just property. And one of the conversations that comes up a lot, both with people in property or outside of property, is this idea of like, oh, do I quit my job and just go, you know, guns blazing with property investing or whatever? My answer is actually always no. You know, it might sound a bit controversial or counterintuitive, but you need a financial runway in order to survive. So what I say to people who are considering leaving their day jobs to pursue an entrepreneurial dream is to make sure they have a war chest, make sure they've got savings to cover their living expenses at least for a year, if not a little bit longer, because most businesses take 5 years before they break even and start to become profitable. In property, obviously, you know, it could, who knows how long it might take, and your upfront costs are that much higher. But you know, I don't want to be selling people this naive dream of like, yeah, just give it, you know, throw everything to the wayside and just go full on and, you know, it'll happen overnight kind of thing, because that just isn't the reality. And if you've got the stress of where's the rent coming from and payments coming, and where am I going to get my food from and how am I going to afford childcare or whatever it is, that is a huge distraction and a huge burden away from the energy and time you could be focusing on building a business. So make sure before you take that leap that you have some safety net, whether it's savings or a partner who's still working or a part-time job that you still work. But it's not this like, I'm going to cut everything and just, you know, sort of, you know, jump into the precipice. Like, you need to have a parachute before you do.
Yeah, I mean, I so agree with you. I think sometimes you can read like the inspiring stories of the entrepreneur who's become a billionaire, and they lived on a barge in the river, you know who I'm talking about, things like that, and they threw everything into their business. But the thing with those stories is there's a massive survivor bias. And so you only hear about the guys who made it big, and then they go, well, this is how I did it, so you do it the way I did it, and it's going to work for you. But actually, it misses all of the people who tried to do that and it didn't work. So I, like you, try to encourage people to have some kind of runway or some kind of safety net. So whether that's a baseline income from employment or savings, as you say, for a reasonable period of time, or multiple streams that you can, rely on, etc. It's sensible. And I think, the whole 1 year thing seems to make sense to me and resonates with me. So That's good. I think when, I guess, so having made the decision that it's property, and
Yep.
then you would be the one to be full-time, and your husband
Hmm.
would be presumably part-time or evenings and
Hmm.
weekends. Yep.
Yep.
Um, what did you do next? How did you start?
a lot of a lot of busy work, to be honest. So one thing we did do is, we sort of got mentoring and we got training, right? We wanted to fast track things, so we signed up to a property program that took us through a 12 month process of just getting smart about various strategies. It gave us a wonderful community to help us when we had specific questions, or when we were, when things go wrong and you feel like, oh my gosh, this is like everything is falling apart. It was sort of the mix of like having, getting the content, getting the support, the community, and helping with that. Yeah, just sort of the mindset around success and what you need to do and who you need to become in order to start a business. So we had that as far as like getting smart and being immersed in a community of other investors. And then we just, again, I said it earlier, but my husband and I are both, really analytical, and we like information, and we want to make sure that we know what we're doing before we try to do it. And so, yeah, we learned as much as we could, but then again, without sort of going obsessively down this sort of black hole of just constantly consuming information. We're like, okay, well, we still don't have any experience, but we know enough to start taking small baby steps. And so we just got started, and actually some of our first property, that rental that we bought, was before we had started any of our mentoring or anything like that. And it was actually while I was still in business school. And we just thought, well, there's no better way to learn than learn by doing. And so we'll start small, relatively safe. It still felt terrifying and scary at the time. But yeah, we just got started. I mean, at some point you have to stop learning and you have to stop doing, and start actually, experiencing what it is that you want to try to achieve.
Yeah, very good. I mean, so just to kind of give us a bit of a reference on timing. So approximately how long ago was it when you sort of decided to go forward in property? How many years ago now was that?
8 years.
8 years ago. Okay. And then when you bought that first property, 8 years and one day, or 8 years
Yeah,
minus one day.
8 years, probably 8 years and a few months.
Yeah, just a few
So
months.
yeah,
Yeah.
it
Okay.
was it was relatively quick, but there was a lot of, it's sort of hard to put a time on when it got started. There was a lot of sort of seed planting and conversation having that went into that point. But yeah, I would say sort of roughly, a few months after we decided we're going to definitely do this full time, we'd found something that seemed, yeah, it just seemed just enough of a bit of a stretch, but still relatively safe enough for us to just go with it.
Well, it's interesting. So you made a decision, and relatively quickly you took action on, on that
Yep.
decision, which is kind of the point I wanted to highlight, really. And
Yep.
then the learning and the training that you talked about in the 1 year program.
Yep.
How long after that did you decide to step into that?
So our first property we bought in April of 2012, and then I think we didn't start that program until 2014. So about a year and a half later.
Okay. And were there other properties that came along in between, or was it?
Oh yeah, there were a few that came and went, and thankfully went. I also always tell people, be thankful for the ones that get away. But yeah, we were always looking. But one of our biggest constraints was finances.
Yeah.
And we literally, after having bought that first property, all we could afford, so which was just a small 2-up, 2-down Victorian terrace, all we had left of our personal funds that we could look at as investments, as potential investments, were flats, 1-bedroom flats. And so that's what we were looking for. And we had one, can't even remember now why it fell through. But yeah, we had one that had gone pretty far into the process of completing, and then it fell through, and there was a long hiatus. So the next property we bought, rental property or investment property, wasn't until June of 2014, so over 2 years later.
And presumably at that point you were in the 1 year program, were you?
We were, yeah. So we were doing the training and the mentoring and all of that kind of stuff. And to be honest, I don't think it was the fact that we had started the training that got us that property, but it was more just that momentum that we had maintained over the previous 2 years of looking, of assessing, of developing relationships, all of that kind of stuff had finally come to fruition.
Is that why you said a lot of busy work?
Yeah, I think, well, it was busy work in two senses. One, it kept me busy, but two, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was doing a lot of just activity that actually was going to lead nowhere, and it was a lot of days. This is the thing with when you become your own boss that a lot of people struggle with, and I sure as heck did, is structuring your time. Because all of a sudden you don't have those daily markers. You have to be in by this time and finish by this time. This is when you get a break, and this is when you get to, all of those things that structure your day are gone, and you're doing it for yourself. And so, one of my favorite quotes is, the task expands to fill the time allotted. And so, I would spend all day just sort of meandering slowly between research and agent phone calls and doing viewings and all this kind of nonsense. And there was, if I at that time, looked at the actual sort of concentrated, sort of targeted, goal-focused work that I was doing, it was probably a lot less than I would have liked to think, because I was just sort of all over the place. And I think, again, for my personality, I need to go through that process before I impose a structure on myself and see what should go into that structure. But there was just a lot of like, I'll check my email, or I'll go on Zoopla for a little while and see what happens. There wasn't a like, this is what I'm going to do, and then this is what I'm going to do. It's just sort of it was more reactive than proactive.
Yeah, and I know you now. I didn't know you then, but I know from what I know of you now that you don't just drift through your days and time. You've learned a lot. In fact, you mentioned a phrase earlier, and I might not be quoting you directly, but you said it's what we become. And so maybe we can come back to that. I just want to signpost that statement, because I do know you today, and it sounds like the description of yourself even that you're portraying back in 2012, 2014 might be slightly different. Let's say that it seems to be. So approximately 2 properties in 18 months or so?
Yeah, about, yeah.
Yeah. But I think things have picked up a bit quicker since then, haven't they? So what did you do? How did it expand?
I think I would say from 2015 to 2018, it was a much faster pickup. And really, I think, like I said earlier, it was just a lot of the momentum was building up, and the relationships and the seeds that we had been planting were starting to bear fruit. Some of it was also confidence. So we started going for, more things that previously felt uncomfortable. Now we'd had a bit of experience, they felt more comfortable. We also had access to more finances because, again, in addition to the learning we got from doing our first few deals on our own, we also were then able to have a bit of credibility to then go out to just friends and family initially and to say, hey, look, we're out of our own funds, but we're still investing because it makes sense for all of these reasons. If you're interested in being an investor, let's have a chat kind of thing. And so it was a combination of like, okay, well, we started to find ways to get access to the funds we needed to invest. We had a bit of confidence and a bit of experience from the projects we'd done. And so all of that, plus all of the learning, the community, the support, the network, the contacts, all of those things, it starts to snowball. And I would say those 3 years were sort of the peak of our sort of what one might refer to our fast-paced growth.
Okay, and so just if it's all right with you, can you give us a sense of either the quantities or whatever of properties that happened in that 3-year period?
So in the first 2 years we did, I would say in the first 2 years we did 2 properties. Actually, sorry, at the tail end of that second year we got our 3rd property. So 2 years, 3 properties, and then in the subsequent 3 years we did 17 more.
17.
17, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's quite a step change, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what sort of strategies were you adopting? Because it sounds like at least the first one or perhaps 2, I'm not sure about the 3rd one, but were more kind of buy-to-let style.
Correct. Yeah. So we started out with single lets, and then we moved over to HMOs, and then we moved over to conversions. So title split type projects and house to flat conversions. And by that point, as of sort of that 2018 marker, when we had reached those 20 properties, we had also then reached the income point where we had replaced both my income and my husband's income. So he retired from his day job in June of 2018.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So that was that a clear, I pretty much know the answer, but was that a clear goal to get to that point around about that sort of time? Yeah.
It was. It definitely was. Yeah.
But what was also interesting, you just sort of, you just talk so naturally, and I'm just trying to restate what you said to kind of make sure everybody heard it. But you said you had some single let buy-to-lets, then you went to HMO, and then you went to conversions.
Yep.
It's kind of, it's a progression, perhaps in complexity. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and again, that was always part of the plan, because after, gosh, I mean, it sounds silly to say it out loud sometimes, but after about like HMO number 5 or so, we just started to get bored, and it wasn't because, obviously every project has its own challenges, its own unique personality, or whatever you want to call it. But like from a skills building perspective, we had plateaued, and so we were like, we always knew that we wanted to do bigger, better, more challenging, more interesting, that kind of stuff. And so from the beginning, we knew that there was going to be this sort of step, this sort of logical progression of steps that we would take, both again to feel comfortable at every step and every level, that we were pushing ourselves but not to the breaking point, that we were taking calculated risks, that we were constantly learning and expanding and growing and pushing ourselves, and not just sort of resting back and constantly rinse and repeating everything we had already done to date. So yeah, it was definitely very much part of the plan. And then the plan from there was, once we had replaced both of our incomes, bought back our time, bought back our freedom, all of those kinds of things, then both of us could focus on what we're really passionate about. I, in the beginning, didn't know what that would be. Over the past 8 years, I've really, come to understand that for me, it's training, mentoring, coaching, helping other entrepreneurs. And for my husband, it's development. I mean, he's properties in his blood through and through. And I mean that sort of not sort of genealogically, but just for him as an individual. And so now our main focus as far as our property business is concerned is on just buying off-market new build opportunities, and he's been doing brilliantly with those.
Yeah, well, actually, it's worth just diving in. There's a couple of strands there, but it's worth diving into post 2018, when your husband was working and then able to work in the business full time. Yeah. He focused on development projects, larger development projects, by the sound of it. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And so what made you choose that direction collectively?
Yeah, I think it was just the next logical step. We had done some conversions for which felt for us pretty big. And we just thought, okay, well, if we can do sort of 3 units, why not 5? Why not 15? It doesn't get 3 to 5 times more complicated. It's just, but it is a different set of skills, a different set of professionals that you have to work with, and all that kind of stuff. So it was the logical next step, but also because it would give us a lot more creative license, to some extent, to just really, because again, with conversions, you're sort of stuck with the fabric and the 4 walls. Whereas with new builds, I mean, you really can just do some fantastically beautiful things. And again, all credit to my partner, but he's found a couple of architects, these one set of architects in particular, who just, I mean, you cannot help but gasp when you see their mock-ups, and we had a really lovely little sort of interaction with a tree specialist who's consulting on one of our sites now, and he's a tree specialist, and it was the heritage specialist, who sort of works with listed buildings. And even he said, the designs that the architect has come up with are just, they're just remarkable, and so it's that's the emotional gratification, the almost sort of, I don't know how else to put it, but being able to have that much creative control and creative license to just do something truly breathtaking is really nice.
And was there an element also that perhaps you were both more free to take what might be, because larger projects, they take longer time, they perhaps carry more risk. So, they're more complex, and you need a different skill set, but you need different people on the team, as you've already mentioned. But you had this baseline of income.
Exactly.
Okay. So
But that's 100% it. Yeah, and that's why I say to people, you need to have your income sorted before you do anything else. You know, it's
yeah.
recurring income that you have to get sorted, because yeah, otherwise these would all still be very much pipe dreams. I mean, as you said, that developments are hugely time consuming, are hugely expensive. You're adding one, sometimes two zeros to the end of everything, both costs and potential profit. So the risks are just that much greater. And if you don't know where the food is the money is going to come to put food on your table, and you're taking on those kinds of risks, it's just, for us, for our risk profile, it was just too much. Whereas, yes, once we were able to have a recurring, consistent stream of income, that took care of all of the sort of the background considerations. So then we could focus on slightly higher risk, longer term projects.
Yeah. And was that developed to sell or developed to rent, or a mixture?
So I think at some point we'll probably develop to sell. Right now, our focus is really on just getting planning permission and then selling it on with planning gain.
Oh,
So we
okay.
can cycle out of those deals relatively quick, sort of either buy new assets, new rental properties with it, or maybe pay down mortgages so our cash flow goes up. But just to give us a few more options for those first few in particular, I think, especially now given all of the uncertainties in the market. But yeah, I mean, the biggest uplift comes from the planning gain, and so that's, I think we're both keen to make sure that we capitalize on that, and then use that money to just rebalance our portfolio in other ways.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're kind of using your skills and expertise to get the planning uplift, but then rather than stepping into building out the developments, you're selling them on to other developers with planning approved.
Exactly. Yep.
And having working on some projects at the moment, there's a lot of merit perhaps in looking at that. There is more risk, obviously, in development, in building out. But, not being able to go on site for 12 weeks is one of them. Right now. So I think that's an interesting angle. So you're going for the planning uplift and capitalizing on that. And as you say, rebalancing your existing portfolio. That is interesting. So in terms of, just again, in terms of scale, so you'd got to about 20 properties around about 2018. Kind of fill the gap in what happened between 2018 and 2020 then.
We actually sort of rationalized, to use sort of a fancy term, but we sold one of our properties. A couple of our rent-to-rents that we had from the beginning, we gave back or packaged on and sold on to other investors. And I think our focus really is just on consolidating, because I don't think either one of us got into the property game to be a landlord or landlady to hundreds and hundreds of tenants. We just want to have quality over quantity and make sure that we're constantly reviewing how our assets are performing. So we've actually shrunk a bit. We went from 20, we're now down to 17. To be honest, our plan is over the next 18 months to perhaps maybe shrink even a little bit more, to just really tighten our business. And just free up the time, the energy, the sort of the mental capacity to do some of these bigger deals that we're doing. So yeah, over the past 2 years, it's really been so that's been sort of on the rental portfolio side of things. On the development side of things, the 2 years have really been invested in, like I said, working with other great people and getting super smart about planning policy and the various councils that we're looking at. And then again, my husband sort of has been coming up with his whole process of identifying these off-market opportunities and then reaching out to sellers cold. And some of that takes a lot of time. I would say we got started in earnest on sort of doing these cold letters to these sites that he had identified back in June 2018 when he joined us full time in our business. And we didn't sign our first option agreement until maybe April of last year. So these things take quite a long time before you even sort of get close to a deal. So it's been constantly progressing those things, and again, getting really good at as I said, understanding local planning policy, so that when we go in to put in a planning application, it's as close to a home run as you can possibly get.
Understood. And so you already were into multiple income streams here, aren't we? So you've got the rental portfolio, then you've got the planning uplift side of things. We haven't even yet got to some of what you're doing, which is more on the training mentoring side as well. But I think just to pause a little bit on the rationalization, because I think that's really interesting. You said you rationalize in terms of numbers of properties. but you also kind of allude to maybe you're paying down a bit of debt as well. So was your equity
Mhm.
position actually going up?
Slowly. I mean, it was never we've never been overly leveraged. So every year we sort of calculate across the portfolio what our average is. And I think at last December, it was like 65 or 67% loan to value average across the board. So we've got some properties where we've got like, over 60% equity, other properties where we've got 25% equity. So it is a bit of a mix. But yeah, I think, what we'd like to at some point to be, well, totally mortgage free, but we also want to be sensible about how we pay down. So it's always a priority of paying down the most expensive lending first. And that tends to be from private investors. And then, sort of making accelerated payments on some of the mortgages that are a bit higher.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, very sensible. Then you could ride out perhaps some of the rough times that
Yeah,
inevitably will happen when we look at market cycles. So that makes
yeah,
sense. You've kind of touched on a little bit of working with third parties, let's say that, private investors, friends and family, from
yeah.
the financial point of view. But, you know, would you say that's contributed quite a lot to your growth over
Oh,
the
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't care how rich you are, at some point you'll run out of your own money,
yeah.
unless you're, I mean, sort of, 9, 10 figure sort of wealthy or whatever. But yeah, for most people, at some point you will run out of your own funds. And that, to be honest, let's be real about it. Like, that is the biggest constraint. Properties are expensive, even, regardless of where you live, they're still 5, 6 figure investments.
Mhm.
Um, and not every, most people don't have multiple millions just sat there in the bank doing nothing, waiting for them to invest in. So yeah, I mean, we found that we had to start working with private investors relatively early on.
Yeah. Would you mind? I mean, I don't know if you're comfortable, but would you mind sharing any order of magnitude in terms of funds or numbers of people you work with, whatever you're comfortable in sharing, really?
Gosh, so we've worked probably, I mean, it's over 20, the number of private investors we've worked with. I would say the bulk of them, maybe 60% are yeah, I would say 60, maybe 65% of them are family members. The remainder are either close friends or investors we've developed relationships with over the past few years. I can't tell you, I think sort of over time, not all at once, but over time, we've probably borrowed close to 3 million and then, paid back various parts of it. Um, and then just as far as sort of the range of investment, I think the lowest investment we've got with us at the moment is a £15,000 investment. And then the biggest one is £250,000. So quite a range, but I would say most of them tend to be 50K plus.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
Put you on the spot a bit. And I was trying to make sure that you were comfortable sharing the numbers.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
but it's really interesting because a lot of people, it's the holy grail, okay, isn't it? It's holy grail, working with private investors, joint venture partners, whatever your language you want to use. But you've
Yeah.
just said some really interesting things there about, the majority at least were, well, probably sounds to me like
Still are.
the vast majority are very close to you in some
Yep.
way, either friends,
Yeah.
family, or people you become closer to.
Yeah.
And so you've not gone out and, you know, tapped up a load of people randomly in a coffee shop and they've given you, £1 million to invest in your portfolio, basically.
No. Yeah, no, and I think to be honest, again, well, I spoke to your mastermind group about this a few weeks ago, but for us, the relationships are so key. We don't want just dumb money, we don't necessarily need active investors in every investment, but like, we want to know the people we're working with. We want to know that our values are the same, that our standards are the same. And yes, even though they are passive investors, we want to make sure we like them, and that they like us, and that there's some sort of a mutuality there. And so yeah, we have some investors who we aren't friends and family, but we got to know them for at a minimum a year plus before we took a penny of their money, because for both sides, it just makes a lot more sense that way.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that even more, but probably can't today. But I just wanted to ask, because you've got so many really positive things about your business. Another thing you shared with our mastermind group,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, you talked about the direct to vendor sort of letters that you were sharing. Um,
Yeah.
the statistics in terms of the response rates, etc., you had there were amazing to me. Well, at
Yeah.
a global level, could you just say what that was?
Yeah, so I don't have my whiteboard in front of me in this room, but I think, and again, this is all credit to my partner. I've had zero role in this sort of success, aside from sort of a bit, refining things on the margins. I think just this year, so not even tallying what he's been doing over the past 2 years, but just calendar year, so January to July, or June, sorry, for the first 6 months of 2020, he sent out, gosh, close to 550 cold letters and had about 300 something responses. So, and look, not all of them have been like, yeah, I want to sell this to you. Some have been, please don't contact me again, or I'm not interested, or yeah, tell me how much you're going to give me over the phone, and then maybe we can talk. So, you know, I would say sort of whittling that down, sort of the real sites that have some potential for a longer conversation and a negotiation are probably maybe 30 or so, you know, so 10% of the responses. But yeah, I mean, he's getting really, really good response.
Yeah,
A good response rate.
I thought it was impressive. To be honest, I get some of those letters, not from you, but I get some of those letters, and they go in one place. So, which is a circular thing, which is to my left right now. So you don't get a response. So that was impressive. So you're obviously doing something. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. But now I'm very conscious that you talked about freedom and then be able to do what you wanted to do. So we've spoken a lot about property, and you said it was a means to an end for you personally. So where are you now? What are you doing? What has property enabled you to do? And what are you active and very interested in?
Yeah. So I think, to be honest, at my core, I'm a teacher. And I say that because everything I've done in my life, and, you know, sort of reflecting very carefully on the things where I felt most in my flow or most happy or whatever, is I love to learn, and then I love to share. And for me, the main outlets for doing that learning and sharing have tended to be sort of, you know, presenting at seminars or at events or whatever else like that, or writing. And writing for me is just, it's a deeply sort of soul broadening experience. So what I have started doing, and again, this wasn't part of the plan, but it unfolded over these past few years through trial and error, and through just sort of starting to tune in a bit more to what I care about and what I love. And so yeah, so I've started doing some training and coaching just for people in property, and then about a year and a half ago, is that right? Yeah, maybe just over a year and a half ago, I started this other community called Entreprenora, which is to focus on helping more women founders become, you know, sort of six-figure plus business successes for themselves in any industry, not just property. And that for me is the main focus moving forward, is just sort of, you know, helping more and more founders basically find and explore their own potential for business and professional success. But of course, as we all know, none of these things, that they're sort of ostensibly about business or success or, you know, profession, but they really are about sort of developing who you are and who you become along the way. And that's really where my focus is. And so, yeah, that's for me, to be honest, that is sort of the forever project.
Okay, that one won't stop by the sound of it. I think being the teacher, I mean, I know you love to consume knowledge, you love to share knowledge, and you've got a great writing style. I know that, I can vouch for that. And so you build in this community. You're working with some property people, did you say?
I am. You know, I'm starting to sort of wind down my property one-on-one stuff. I think for me, I'm still exploring what is the right medium for my teaching. So what I'm mentally just sort of playing around with is doing a more membership-based sort of thing for people in property. And then for the non-property, sort of just general, you know, founders, entrepreneurs, they can be in property, but I'm not, you know, for my entrepreneur community, I've got, you know, a small group boardroom that's like a small mastermind. And I'm also looking into, you know, again, would a membership site of some sort, you know, where people get resources and again, can come together online, would that be the right way forward? So I'm still sort of figuring out what's the best way to reach as many people as I can. Because I think for me, that's the other thing, is like trying to have as much of a positive impact on as many people as possible, and just, yeah, exploring the way to do that most efficiently, I guess.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like the property has provided the baseline. It sounds to me you don't love it. You don't love property.
Well, I do. I love parts of it. So I love, like I said, I love the creativity. I love the transformation. I love all of that kind of stuff. Some of the day-to-day admin, we self-manage all of our properties. And that's partly why I have been the driving force behind the rationalization, is because, it doesn't take a lot of my time, but it still takes a lot of energy, mental energy.
Yeah.
And so it's just making sure that we are as lean and mean as possible on our personal expenses, so we can live and survive on, we make a good income from our property portfolio, but it's really just to sort of cut out all of the fluff in every way possible. So that way we don't have other distractions, we don't have other demands, we don't have big overheads, as it were, and really just giving us that freedom, that time, that headspace, whatever you want to call it, to focus on what we really care about, and to be able to explore it with a bit of leeway.
Yeah, so sounds good. And so just walk me through, I mean, not literally today because we're in the middle of lockdown, but what does your lifestyle look like now? Just paint a sort of a picture of either not necessarily a daily routine, but a typical, I say a week or month or a year in the life of Rupal. What does it look like?
Yeah, it's a bit different, but I would say sort of the broad themes that capture my attention on a regular basis are so writing. I do a lot of writing for both the property community, but also for my entrepreneur community. At some point in the not too distant future, as in like the next few weeks, I'm gonna seriously sit down and actually start writing a book, which has been sort of again in the mental works for a while. And then I would say my property portfolio, our rental portfolio, takes maybe about 10%, maybe 15% of my time. The rest is really invested in building the entrepreneur community and mentoring and coaching and in writing. And I'm sort of, and again, we've talked about this maybe just offline, but I have now become much more diligent about tracking my time. And so I would say on average, even when we didn't have our daughter at home with us, my working day was anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. But that's, sort of concentrated working time, and then family time. And I think that's sort of been pretty consistent. Obviously, there are peaks and troughs in that, and sometimes it's a 12-hour day, and other times it's a 20-minute day because of other things going on. But yeah, most of my time is on. I would say if I had to sort of give you percentages, I would say about 15% on managing our portfolio, and then the rest, sort of the 85% on various coaching and training and writing activities.
Yeah, which is still it's what you're doing, but it's active, right? You're writing and you're working on portfolio and you're working in your community with the entrepreneur community and property community. And outside of that, you mentioned your daughter, for example, but do you sort of do you stay in one place, or do you perhaps move around? Do you take holiday? How does that work with your lifestyle?
We used to take holidays, but I mean, to be honest, one of the big lifestyle goals that my husband and I have both, I mean, we're both world travelers. I mean, we've both lived in multiple countries for multiple years, him mostly in the Middle East, me sort of a bit between the Middle East, South America, and Europe. And we would love to travel more, I think, with young kids. So we've got a 3-year-old daughter, and then I'm currently pregnant. So, with super young kids, it's a bit tricky. But no, we love to travel. And in normal times, we would at least go to the States, about 3 to 4 times a year to see my family, and then maybe have one or two sort of smaller holidays in Europe, just to sort of see something different and get our daughter out and about. And so that's sort of one of our lifestyle goals, is to really just see more of the world, and not so we can start ticking things off our list kind of thing. But, we both love to travel, and we love people, and we're fascinated by the endless sort of differences, but also commonalities between communities and people. And food is a big thing too for me. So I'd love to, just love to sort of broaden my daughter's horizons. I don't want my kids in any way to be sort of live in any form of a bubble. So when travel is possible again, it's definitely going to be back on the agenda, high on the agenda.
I'm looking forward to that day too. But just maybe thinking about you, just drawing some conclusions, I suppose. And you talked about what you become, just to bring us back to that thought. And I was just wondering if things that you've learned along the way that perhaps you could impart from, in the form of wisdom to others who might be either at the beginning or just part way down that track. I know you've got a lot of wisdom and a lot of learning. What did you pick up along the way? What did you become? What tips or advice might you give to those listening right now?
It's funny because as I'm thinking about the answers, I'm literally getting chills. I think I could really distill it into two. The first one is, if you don't write it down, it won't get done. And I never, as I said, I was much more of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of person. And literally, it was actually through our property business that I started planning my year, my life, my targets, my goals. By disposition, I'm a much more intuitive person generally. So I don't really feel as much of a need to write things down. I sort of know or can feel when certain things need working on or addressing or focus or whatever. But it wasn't until I started really sitting down and thinking about, what do I care about? What do I want to accomplish? How am I going to do it? That it actually started to happen. And I know, this comes up so often in whatever books about habits or performance or whatever it is, but it's like there is literal magic in putting it down on paper. And I can tell you without exception, anything I've written down and then made a plan and executed on the plan has happened. I mean, literally everything. And it might not have happened in the time that I wanted it to, or in the exact way, but it's happened. Yeah. And if I had left it all just to my memory and my intuition, something would have gotten lost, And so this isn't to sort of overburden ourselves with endless goals or to-do lists or whatever. But for me, I sort of every year just focus on between 3 and 5, just big things that I really care about. Some are personal, some are professional, some are physical or health related, whatever it is. But, keep it relatively simple because that's what your life is made of. And I think, we can lose sight of it in the day-to-day routine or rut, whatever you want to call it. But until you write it down and then come up with a plan to get there, it just won't happen. So that's one. And then the second thing is, accept who you are and really, really, really get to know who that person is. And the reason I say it's a combination of the knowing, and also the acceptance is because if it was only over maybe the past 5 years or so that I've started doing a lot more of these reflective exercises for myself. What do I care about? What makes me happy? When do I feel I'm in my flow? All of these things that we were talking about. And for the longest, I would struggle between like, I'm so happy when I'm doing X. So when I'm in front of a room or when I'm writing, that is me in my zone. But because it came easily, or because it gave me so much joy, or because it felt natural, I would almost dismiss it and devalue it. And I think once I started to accept that actually those are my superpowers and not everybody can do them, not everybody likes them, not everybody can do it well, it's really changed a lot of how I approach my work. And it's made me much more conscious of just doubling down on my strengths, amplifying them, finding ways to work them into more of my day-to-day reality, instead of always feeling like, oh, well, it comes easy to me, so it's not worth it. And to be honest, a lot of what I'm building now with my entrepreneurial community was a result of that process of reflection of like, the themes in my life when I look at them was, this element of teaching that, I've talked about before, about creating community, about building community, about understanding people, about wanting to connect people and have, and being able to help them improve their lives in some meaningful way. But, you just sort of do these things naturally, or whatever your own superpower is, you do naturally, and you don't really think of it as anything other than who you are. But sort of once I started really paying attention to me and to what is important to me and what I'm good at, it's just helped me be a lot more, I don't want to sound overly sort of woo-woo about this, but like, just helped me feel happier and a bit more content, that like, I can just be me. And again, not everybody has the same skills, not everybody has whatever talents that I have or anybody has or whatever. And it's just to not always try to do something just because, or to work on something just because you're not good at it. It's that whole idea of like, oh, well, if you're bad at something, work on your deficiencies. Well, I've started to flip it on its head and think, well, actually, why don't I just focus on what I'm really good at and let the rest of it go, to the extent that you realistically can.
Yeah, I mean, so much there, really important, I think. And, I love the superpowers. Um, Focus on what you're good at and don't necessarily worry about what you're not so good at. You can plug your gaps, you can bring people around you,
Exactly.
you can do all that sort of stuff. So there's a sort of release, isn't there? Once you really
Mm,
uncover your true identity, your strengths, and double down, as you say, on them. Um,
yep.
and I'm really glad you said that, write it down and kind of make a plan, because talk about that quite a lot with people. So
Yeah.
some people resist that, but I'm
I
glad.
was one of them.
Yeah, okay. But equally, Rupal, you said something really important there, which was that you've got your own unique strengths and character and identity. My interpretation of some of what you said. So not everybody could be exactly like you, but
Mm,
perhaps they could, resonate a little bit with the path that you've taken. And I just wanted to say, thanks so much for sharing, for being so open with. I don't know if you hear that plane going over, but.
no.
Okay, good. I did. I can hear it. Never mind. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing and being so open about things. And perhaps thinking about just wrapping up shortly. One thing I'd like, maybe, or maybe I'd like, but maybe people listening would like, is if you want to, how people could connect with you and what
Sure.
you're, because I know you've got more than one brand. Maybe you want to
Yeah.
mention. And there's that. And if
Yeah.
there's any parting thoughts or anything I've missed out that you think really we should talk about before we conclude, would that be okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me for property, you can just get in touch via our website and email. It's just www.blueinfinityproperty.com. If you're a woman in property or in a non-property business, the entrepreneur community that Richard so kindly mentioned earlier on is for women founders only, and that's enora.co.uk. So entrepreneura, as in the name Nora, entrepreneura.co.uk. And I am still very much, responding to any communications or emails that people send me either through our property website or through the entrepreneur website. So do get in touch with us in either way. And then as far as parting thoughts, I guess this is sort of going to be an extension of what well, I guess part of the theme of this was, or some of what we talked about earlier, was having multiple streams of income. I think the other thing to appreciate is that many of us, if not all of us, are, what one entrepreneur I know refers to as multi-passionate. And so, yes, you have to have a focus for a little while, or at least something that brings in, again, the money to pay the rent, to buy your food, to all that good stuff, to cover the basics. But it's okay if you like more than one thing, and it's okay if you pursue more than one thing, and as long as you are doing it responsibly and you're sort of taking care of yourselves, your families, whatever. But I don't think that there's with some exception, I think most people aren't just one thing, and there are many different aspects of ourselves that we can bring to the forefront that will lead to different businesses or different types of businesses. And so just because you think you're something or you're told you're something, just give yourself a bit of room to explore that, and I actually meet a bunch of people in property who, as we sort of go through our time together, they don't actually want to be in property. They went to a seminar or that's in their family, and they just feel that they should do it, or it's the hot new thing to do. But like, you can still listen to a property podcast but not actually want to do it, and that's okay too. And so I guess really just tune into what is important to you, what's important to your life, what interests you have, and just explore them, again, responsibly and carefully and all of those things. But none of us is just one thing. So give yourself permission to explore.
Yeah, I so agree with that. I mean, I think there are some people where they just need to focus and be that one person, but equally, like, we're all different. And I use the phrase portfolio people.
Yeah, I like that.
Multi-passionate people, or multi-passionate. So I think portfolio people, those people who just feel that they like variety, they get stimulated by being involved in different projects, perhaps. Multi-passionate portfolio people. So that sounds like a great way to end. I'd love to dive into more conversation. We could talk about human design and things like that,
Yay.
getting to know each other. But maybe we'll park that for another conversation and we'll take it off.
Sounds good to me.
But
Wonderful.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Rupal. As ever, really appreciate you sharing. I'm sure people are going to get a lot of benefit and merit out of listening to your inspiring share today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. Always happy to be here.
You're welcome. Great stuff. Talk soon.